Well, glad to have you back. Going to be looking at the women of Exodus as found in the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. And I am very excited to share this with you. The backdrop of this is found in ancient Egypt, a land of great wealth. We find that Egypt is the most powerful nation on the planet at the time. The Pharaoh is the most powerful man. And as we look at the slides, I look at the grandeur and also look at the, what would you say, very prideful nation. The nation is a polytheistic nation. What does that mean? They believe in a plurality of gods. And that's going to be their downfall. And as I share this with you, there's going to be a number of things I'm going to try to point out, and I hope I can remember them. And forgive me if I stumble through this, because it's just very exciting for me. And let's continue on. Exodus chapter 1, verse 7. But the Israelites had many children, so they grew into a very large family. They became very powerful. They were everywhere in the whole country. Well, that caused a real problem with the Pharaoh. And you're going to learn about that in this very next slide. Verse 8 and following. Later a new king began to rule in Egypt. He did not know anything about Joseph. Well, that's a whole nother story. But Joseph was a very young man, probably in his early 20s, when he started ruling over Egypt. He was second under Pharaoh. And Egypt became very wealthy and very powerful because of the rule of Joseph, as well as did the children of Israel. But Joseph was a very strong believer in the God of the Bible. And we're going to see that that's where we have a problem. As we continue on in verse 9, he, that's this new king, said to his people, "Look, the Israelites have become too many for us. They are more powerful than we are. We must find a clever way to stop them. If we do nothing, their families will become even bigger." So, here we go. The Pharaoh is trying to think of a very clever way to stop them. But as we continue to read, this clever way sounds pretty twisted and perverted to me. Verse 11. So the Egyptians made the Israelites work as their slaves. Wow. So I'm pointing that out. Slaves. That was his clever way. The Egyptian masters made the Israelites work very hard. They had to build cities for the king, Pharaoh, where he could store food for his people. The names of the cities were Pithom and Ramses. Well, as we have pictured here in this slide, we can see how they had turned these Israelites into slaves. They could care less if they lived or died. They persecuted them 24/7. And the other thing that's interesting, there's a terminology. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. It's called racism. Because this new king was an Egyptian, and Joseph was not. He was an Israelite. But the new king was an Egyptian, and he was very racist. He was very prejudiced. And what he did, he instilled that within the nation of the Egyptians. And he caused that racism then to come upon his own people. And so they were very brutal with the children of Israel. But that's where the story starts to get interesting, because we're going to learn about a couple of women here as we go through this story. Alright, let's continue. In verse 15, there were 2 Israelite women. Alright, we're talking about women now, who helped the other women when they were giving birth. These 2 women were called Shiphrah and Puah. The king of Egypt said to them, "When you help the Israelite women at the birth of their children, this is what you must do. If she gives birth to a son, kill him. But if the child is a daughter, you may let her live." Now, isn't that interesting? So here we have the king, the Pharaoh, commanding these 2 women that every time an Israelite woman would give birth, and if it's a son, you are to kill him. Well, can you imagine as a woman? I mean, there you are, a midwife, helping another lady give birth, and if it's a male child, you're to kill that child. Wow. Well, let's continue on. Verse 18 and following, then the king of Egypt called the 2 women to come to him. He asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The 2 women said to Pharaoh, "Israelite women are not like Egyptian women. Israelite women are very strong. They give birth to their babies very quickly before we arrive at the house." Because the 2 women respected God, God, was kind to them. The Israelite people continued to grow in number. They became very strong because the 2 women obeyed God. He gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh spoke to all the Egyptian people. He said, "When an Israelite boy is born, you must throw him in the river Nile. But you can let the baby girls live." Now, isn't that interesting? So here we have the women are not willing to obey the king. Why? Because as it states, they have a great respect for God, and they obey God. And because they obey God, as it says here, God even causes their own families to grow and prosper. But then we see where Pharaoh then turns his racism, his prejudice, towards his own people. And he then instructs them that if an Israelite boy is born, to throw him into the Nile River. So, the king feels like he's going to take care of this. I'm not going to put up with these Israelite ladies. So, he makes an edict to his own people. Well, we're going to see how God turns his own words against the Pharaoh. We continue in Exodus chapter 2. And it says, "At this time there was an Israelite man who belonged to the family of Levi, and he married a woman who was also a descendant of Levi. The woman became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a beautiful boy. A beautiful boy, it says. So she hid him for 3 months. Well, we learn in chapter 6 of Exodus that this man and this woman, it says Amram married Jochebed, his father's sister. Aaron and Moses were their sons. Well, one thing I want to point out as we read, it said of these two, they were of the tribe of Levi. Well, that's another interesting story, because Levi was the tribe that the priest came from. And you'll find in the Old Testament a book of Leviticus, and it goes in depth into the law of God. The Leviticus law, or the Levitical priest. And we see that these two individuals are from that very tribe. And I think that's very interesting, because they're very educated in the will and the law of God. Well, as we continue on in Exodus chapter 2, verse 3, talking again about Jochebed, then she could not continue to hide him. Remember, he was 3 months old. So she took a basket that was made from river grass. She painted the basket with tar to keep the water out of it. Then she put her baby in the basket. She put the basket at the edge of the river. She hid it among the river grasses. Well, we learned some other interesting tidbits. The boy is 3 months old. She makes this basket, covers it with tar, puts the baby in the Nile River. Well, guess what's in the Nile River? Yes, you guessed it, crocodiles. Also, poisonous snakes. But again, God is the one that's in control. And everything that we're watching or reading is the providence of God and how it's working against the Pharaoh. And so I again are pointing out some different tidbits or facts and how God is going to turn the tide on Pharaoh. We continue in Exodus chapter 2, starting at verse 4 and following. The baby's sister, that's Miriam, stood not very far away. She wanted to see what would happen to the baby. Soon, Pharaoh's daughter, another woman, came to wash herself in the river. Her servant girls, we have some other ladies, were walking near the edge of the river. Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket among the river grasses. So she sent one of her servant girls to fetch it for her. When she opened the basket, she saw the baby boy. We got a problem. Can you just imagine the heart of this woman when she saw that baby boy? He was crying, plucking at the heartstrings of this lady. She was sorry for him, and she said, "This is one of the Israelite children." So, you can just imagine the emotion as they were running wild through the mind and the heart of not only the daughter, but the rest of these ladies. As we continue on in chapter 2, starting verse 7 and following, then the baby's sister, remember that's Miriam, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Do you want me to fetch one of the Israelite mothers?" Ah, now the plot even gets thicker. Listen very carefully. She can take care of this baby, and she can feed him for you. Pharaoh's daughter said, "Yes, please do that." So the girl went, and she fetched the baby's own mother. Oh boy, is this story getting powerful or what? Alright, let's continue on. Pharaoh's daughter said to the baby's mother, "Please take the baby to your house." Did you just hear what I read? Please take this baby to your house. Wow, Miriam is going to take her own baby back home, but the story even gets thicker. You can take care of him for me. I will pay you. What? Here Pharaoh had instructed the male boys are to be thrown into the Nile. They're to be killed. We got crocodiles. We got poisonous snakes. And yet here's this baby being taken out of the river by Pharaoh's own daughter and her maids. And now we have Miriam, the baby's own mother, and now she's even going to take the baby home, and they're even going to pay her to do it. So we continue on. It says, so the woman took the baby home, and she took care of him, took him home. I imagine she was running as fast as she could go. I know, it didn't say that, but wow. So there's a story, folks, about the women of God. How Pharaoh, even with all the things that he said, God had turned the tides on him. And he used the women, the slaves, and even the daughter of Pharaoh, and even the daughter with her maids. And this child ends up in the household of Pharaoh, raised in absolute, what would you say, elegance, taught by the greatest teachers that Egypt could produce, also learned from his own mother the ways of the Israelites, remembering the mother and the father were both from the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe. Moses learned both of the way of his own people, the Israelites, and also the way of the Egyptians. What a powerful story. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. And I'd encourage you to get your Bible and to go ahead and read and study. And as Paul Harvey used to say, page 2, the rest of the story. May God richly bless you. Thank you. Real quick, as I said at the very beginning, I was excited to bring this to you, and I realized at the end of the recording I used Miriam as the name of the mother when it's supposed to be Jochebed. So please forgive me. I could go back and redo the whole video, but I just wanted to make that correction. I was excited, and you can understand why. It's just amazing to watch how God can take everything that Pharaoh had put out there and turned it against him. Again, God bless you. See ya.